As all members have received a copy of the call of tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Good evening. My name is Tom Byrne, RTM moderator. Welcome to the April meeting of the Representative Town Meeting. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our March 12 meeting, the reading of those minutes will be omitted. Are there any suggested changes to those minutes? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as submitted stand adopted upon. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, there is a mistake on the minutes with respect to the nomination of the appointment of Mr. Hardman. The details that the RTM approved are incorrect.
All right, are you talking about the term?
Yes.
Mr. Eddy, the minutes have to reflect what we actually did.
That's correct, yeah.
So
In that sense, then they're correct.
then we're gonna have to leave them that way.
Okay.
We can't change the minutes to change something that we didn't do. All right, Mr. Eddy is referring to a incorrect date on the Hardman. That was number 19 in March, and I believe when that term is going to expire in 2020. Is 2020 the correct year, Mr. Eddy?
2020 is the correct year.
All right, so it's a month, and when that comes up, it'll be taken care of then, I'm sure. All right, are there any other suggested changes to the minutes of our March 12 meeting? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as submitted stand adopted upon unanimous consent. All right, was there anyone who needed to be recognized? Any committee chair? All right, I informed our districts and committees that based upon the reports we received, I would recommend tonight that we would combine for the combined calendar, no items to go on the consent calendar, but combine items 1 through 5, 15 and 16 for our combined calendar, where we do hear committee reports and have discussion, and would then consider separately items 7 through 14 and 17, and we would take those up in numerical order. Item 6 has, which is the appointment of that same individual who we were just talking about. We had appointed him in March. So item 6 will be withdrawn. All right, in order to take items up and take one vote on them, we need to suspend the rules. Is there a motion to suspend the rules to combine items 1 through 5, 15 and 16? It has been moved and seconded to suspend the rules and combine items 1 through 5, 15 and 16. The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable and requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of suspending the rules and combining those items, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion has carried. So we will dispose of those combined items first and then proceed with our separate items. So item 1 was postponed from our December meeting. So that item is the appointment of James Doherty to be a regular member of the Commission on Aging with a term expiring March 31, 2021. That is now before us. May we have the reports of the committees that considered that, beginning with Alexis Vulgaris, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Good evening. Health and Human Services interviewed Mr. Doherty in December of 2017, and as the moderator just indicated, this was postponed from that time because appointments was unable to meet with him then. Mr. Doherty professionally is a lawyer. He served on the Commission on Aging since 2009, and he is currently the Commission's secretary. 2 projects that he's been working on while he's been a member are establishing the Friends of the Senior Center, which is a 501c3 modeled after the Friends of Nathaniel Witherell. to help raise money to support unfunded needs of the senior center. They've presently raised about $750,000. And then he's also the inspiration and the person who's been working with Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health with the graduate students there who are helping to assess Greenwich and make Greenwich a more age-friendly community. And just as a little plug, you all should have received a survey to complete for the Commission on Aging. So our vote was 11-0-0 with District 1 absent. And I do believe, though, that there is one change to the date of the expiration. May I offer that, or?
Yes.
Okay, so the term as listed says it's expiring March 31st, 2021, and I believe that should be changed to June 30th, 2021.
All right, and so that would be a motion to amend offered on behalf of your committee?
Correct.
All right, is there any objection to that amendment? That may be adopted upon unanimous consent. Thank you. John Eddy with the report of our Appointments Committee.
The Appointments Committee vote on Mr. Doherty was 12-0-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 1. Item 2 now comes before us. Again, this is an item that was postponed. This from our March meeting. It is a resolution appointing Donald Carlson to be a regular member of the Harbor Management Commission for a term expiring March 31, 2021. May we have the reports of the committees that consider this? Peter Baird, Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Evening, Mr. Moderator, fellow members. The Land Use Committee interviewed Donald Carlson last Monday, 2 Monday nights ago. He's been a regular, an alternate member, and now he's being nominated to be a full regular member of the Harbor Management Commission. And our vote on Mr. Carlson was 11-0-0. District 7 was absent. Mr. Carlson reviewed the progress of the Harbor Management Commission that he has participated in as an alternate. He noted his interest in harbor management potential impact on water quality coming from his experience as an environmental professor. Now that the Mianus River has been dredged, he discussed the Harbor Management Commission's next efforts to convince the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge Greenwich Harbor ahead of schedule in as early as next year by proposing a slightly lower amount of dredging to a level of -10 feet rather than the standard for that channel of 12 feet. This would significantly reduce the cost, as the bottom of this channel has various degrees of contamination that significantly increase the cost of dredge mud disposal. The hope being that the accommodation would facilitate dredging about 5 years earlier than otherwise. The dredged mud still needs to be tested to determine where it can be placed. He mentioned that some people had suggested using the mud to expand the size of Roger Sherman Baldwin Park, if that is possible. There were questions about the fact that dock users are not charged a mooring fee. Donald Carlson explained that the feeling of the Harbor Management Commission was that since dock users paid a larger fee for the docks, of which part flowed to the town through real estate taxes, they were already paying their share to the town. However, it was pointed out by several Land Use Commission members that any funds collected through taxes went to the town general budget and not dedicated to the Harbor Management Commission. There were also questions about why there were some discrepancy regarding the actual mooring count. Mr. Carlson said he believed the count had been completed, but Mr. Lee of District 1 recalled that in the interviews with the other candidates for Harbor Management Commission last month, it was said that Harbor Management had declined to spend the money and time to complete their own count and stated that they would rely on the mooring application and inspection process now that the plan was approved. It was also asked that the Harbor Management Commission work to coordinate its mooring application process with marine facilities to create a single database of registration, insurance, and inspections. Again, our vote on Mr. Carlson was 11-0-0.
Thank you. Andy Chapin, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
We interviewed Mr. Carlson this last meeting. His degree in environmental law from Williams, lives on Greenwich Cove, and has been involved with the Harbor Management Commission for a long time. We asked what he thought the challenges were going forward. He said, number one, mooring, now that we have a plan to get forward and get that in order. Dredging Greenwich Harbor, and coastal resilience, which includes things like flooding, pollution, and siltation. He also saw an opportunity for maybe expanding the pier at Coscob Park, but that would have to be inspected and evaluated. The committee voted 11-0-0, District 4 absent. 11-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. And John Eddy with the report of our Appointments Committee.
Thank you. The Appointments Committee report has nothing to add to the previous two reports. The vote was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 2. Item 3 now comes before us. Once again, this is a postponed item from our March meeting. It is a resolution appointing Frank Mazza to be a regular member of the Harbor Management Commission with a term expiring March 31, 2021. That is now before us. Peter Berg with the Land Use Committee report.
So the Land Use Committee saw Frank Mazza 2 months ago, and the discussion was very similar to the one I reported on with Mr. Carlson. Our vote on Mr. Mazza was 10-0, with District 1 voted no due to the lack of a required Harbor Management Commission budget submission. District 7 voted no due to ongoing hostility toward the harbor master. So that vote was 10-0.
Thank you. Andy Chapin with, Andy Chapin with the Parks and Rec Committee report.
Mr. Mazza had 4 years on the committee since its inception to his chair. He's a retired civil engineer. He's been on several RTM building committees, the BET, and a selectman. He's primarily here because of his experience and connections with the Army Corps of Engineers on dredging, and his primary focus will be dredging Greenwich Harbor. The committee voted 11-0-0 in favor of Mr. Mazza, District 4 absent.
Thank you. John Eddy with the Appointments Committee report.
Again, nothing to add. The Appointments Committee vote on Mr. Mazza was 12-0-0.
Discussion on item 3. Item 4 now comes before us. This is a resolution postponed from our March meeting. It is the appointment of Michael Van Oss to be a regular member of the Harbor Management Commission with a term expiring March 31, 2021. That is now before us. Peter Berg with our Land Use Committee report.
So the Land Use Committee interviewed Michael Van Oss back in March. Same issues. Mr. Van Oss is focused on the mooring record keeping, and he answered many questions. Our vote on Mr. Van Oss was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Mr. Chapin with Parks and Recreation.
Mr. Van Oss, again on the commission for 4 years, very excited to move forward with moorings. He stumbled a bit in explaining the entire process and how it worked with the committee, which can cause some confusion. But in general, he is focused on working with the town's vendors to make sure everyone who services a mooring, that we know who they're servicing, and then following up with a period of stickers and seeing that every boat and every mooring is stickered. And after that, there'll be a survey for moorings that are unattended, which will, again, be dealt with. But he favors the layered approach because he finds that it's more efficient. That being said, the committee voted 8 in favor, 1 against, and 2 abstaining, largely because he couldn't fully explain the full layered process of how the moorings were going to be managed.
Thank you. John Eddy with our Appointments Committee report.
Again, nothing else to add. The Appointments Committee voted 12-0-0 in favor of appointing Mr. Venos.
Thank you. Discussion on item 4. Item 5 now comes before us. This is a resolution postponed from March. It is the appointment of David Noble to be an alternate member of the Harbor Management Commission with a term, now this is a substitute as far as I understand, with a term expiring March 31, 2019 instead of what is in the call. So that is now before us. Mr. Berg with the Land Use Committee report.
So the Land Use Committee interviewed David Noble back in March. He is new to the Harbor Management Commission. He's an alternate. We have nothing to add other than what you read in the explanos. He's a boater, a member of the Old Greenwich Yacht Club, is interested in serving. And our vote on Mr. Noble was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Mr. Chapin with Parks and Recreation.
We also met with Mr. Noble back in March. He is new to this commission. As such, he has no axe to grind with anyone, and he said that his primary goal was to figure out how to work with everyone, which we all liked hearing. He's a member of the Old Greenwich Yacht Club. He takes his role very seriously, and with that said, we voted 11-0-0, District 9 absent.
Thank you. And John Eddy with the Appointments Committee report.
The Appointments Committee voted 12-0-0 in favor of appointing Mr. Noble.
Discussion on item 5. All right, that brings us to item 15. May we, Mr. Eddy, I believe this is an Appointments Committee nomination.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Number 15, Mr. Benoit.
Number 15, resolve that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee of the RTM be appointed RTM representative to the Harbor Management Commission for a term expiring December 31st, 2019. Mr. Joseph Benoit.
Thank you. That being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second and is currently before us. May we have the reports? Mr. Berg with the Land Use Committee report.
So Joseph Benoit met with the Land Use Committee last 2 Mondays ago. He is our RTM liaison to the Harbor Management Commission. He's taking the position that was held by Horst Tebbe for several years. Our vote on Mr. Benoit was 11-0-0, District 7 absent. He reviewed his extensive harbor-related experience, as you can see in the explanos. Several Land Use Committee members stressed the need for Mr. Benoit as RTM liaison to convey to the RTM how the Harbor Management Commission is proceeding with its various project goals as outlined in the Harbor Management Plan, and to not just pass on meeting minutes. He said he would strive to do that. There was a question about why the Harbor Management Commission was not required to create an annual budget for RTM review, as all other departments do. Mr. Benoit said that for the moment he was comfortable leaving the small budget in the hands of the BET. Again, our vote was 11-0-0.
And Mr. Chapin with Parks and Recreation Committee report.
Mr. Benoit is a long-term, third-generation resident of Greenwich. He's been in the Navy, the fire department. He was a deputy chief and fire marshal, former commodore of the Mianus River Yacht Club, and a licensed Coast Guard captain. His point in this is there's not a big learning curve for him. He's going to be aware of the issues and able to report to us in an intelligent way. He also went on to say that he does have a mooring, it is stickered, and the fee is paid. The committee voted 11-0-0, District 4 absent.
Thank you. Mr. Eddy, did you want to report on this one? The Benoit? Okay, thank you. Discussion on item 15. The final combined item now comes before us, item 16. Mr. Siciliano, are you presenting this?
Yes.
Joe Siciliano, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Good evening. Resolved that the Town of Greenwich Parks and Recreation Department accept a gift valued at $35,000 from the Green Fingers Garden Club for a pollinator garden at Baird Park. Further resolved that the Parks and Recreation Department wishes to thank the Green Fingers Garden Club for their continuing support on town projects.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 16 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports of the committees that considered this, beginning with Rob Pirelli-Minetti, Chair of our Finance Committee.
Good evening. Your Finance Committee considered this item 2 weeks ago, Monday night. Mr. Siciliano presented the project. This is a gift of about $35,000 worth of plantings in the Byram Park. After very short discussion, we felt very strongly that this was a good thing. The only real question raised was, were there going to be ongoing costs? And the answer is there'll be some ongoing maintenance cost, but should be de minimis. Finance Committee approved this 12-0-0.
Thank you. Andy Chapin with the Parks and Recreation Committee report.
Joe Siciliano came to our meeting to present this project. It seemed like a no-brainer to us that it's going to be in an intelligent area and greatly enhance the view there. What we also liked hearing was that the Green Fingers Club is working out the planting plan with the Parks Department so that the ongoing maintenance has been thought of in advance and that they will have a more easy job of sustaining it. And with that, we voted 11-0-0, District 4 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 16. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, combined items 1 through 5, 15 and 16, and proceed to poll your delegation. While we are voting, we will continue with the separate items that remain. The first one is item 7, the fire contract. Peter Tessie, our first selectman.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM, item number 7, resolved at the representative town meeting in exercising its authority pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes, Section 7-474B, hereby approves the funds necessary to implement the terms of the Town Local 1042 IAFF 4-year collective bargaining agreement covering the period July 1, 2015 through June 30th, 2019. For fiscal year 15, fiscal year 16-17, and fiscal year 17-18. Said funds have previously been appropriated in the respective adopted fiscal year budgets, and the representative town meeting approves the funds necessary to implement the terms of the Town Local 1042 IAFF collective bargaining agreement covering the period fiscal year 18-19, subject to the budgetary process as prescribed in the town charter. Be it further resolved that the representative town meeting approves any terms of such agreement which may be in conflict with the town charter, special act, ordinance, rule, or regulation adopted by the municipal employer or its agents of the town.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 7 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports of the committees that considered this, beginning with David Detchen, Chair of our Labor Contracts Committee.
Mr. Moderator and fellow members of the RTM, the entry into force of this collective bargaining agreement between the town and Local 1042 of the Firefighters Union covers 4 years and will bring to an end a contract negotiation and arbitration process that has been going on for over 3 years. In late 2014, the town and the firefighters began negotiation of a 4-year contract that would have started in July of 2015. As is typical of the Firefighters Union, they put over 100 issues on the table. but the initial key issue was the staffing of fire trucks by career firefighters. Specifically, the issue was whether it would be 2, 3, or 4 career firefighters who would have to be on the vehicle when a career manned fire truck left the station to respond to a call. The town argued that the staffing of career firefighters was a personnel matter for management and was not subject to mandatory contract negotiation and arbitration. The firefighters argued that staffing was a health and safety issue, and health and safety issues are, in fact, subject to mandatory arbitration or negotiation and arbitration. An impasse in the contract negotiations was declared, and a mediation was not successful, and arbitration on the various issues of the contract began in 2015. It was decided that the arbitration panel would first address the staffing issue before any other issues were addressed by the arbitrators. Finally, 2 years later, in July of 2017, the arbitrators ruled that staffing was indeed a health and safety issue subject to mandatory arbitration. With that issue resolved, the parties and arbitrators then moved on to other issues subject to negotiation, including how the staffing issue would be resolved. In other words, the arbitrators just simply said the staffing issue had to be negotiated. They didn't decide how that negotiation would be resolved. Nevertheless, the union and the firefighters continued discussions on whether a contract settlement could be reached in lieu of further arbitration. And eventually, the parties reduced the unresolved issues to 4. First, would the firefighters agree to the payroll lag system, which other unions in the town have already agreed to? Second, would the firefighters enter into the state insurance pool as of 1 July 2018? Third, what would be the exact language to put into the contract on fire truck staffing, now that the staffing issue had to be resolved by negotiation or arbitration? Fourth and finally, what would be the GWI, the wage increase, for each of the 4 years of the contract, even though 2 years of the contract had already expired? As for the payroll lag, there was no sharp issue here, and the union was willing to go along with the provisions in light of the agreement by the other towns. If they'd tried to arbitrate it, they would have lost. In addition, the union agreed to enter into the state insurance pool as of 1 July 2018, even though that would mean they're entering into the pool a year later than the other unions in town. In addition, the parties agreed to a fairly simple staffing language, which calls for 3 members of the union to be on career manned fire trucks responding to a call in the town, but without any other complications in terms of what kind of firefighters have to be on the truck. Finally, as for the GWI, the town agreed to the union's demand for 2.5% in each of 2015 and 2016-17, years that had already passed. The town agreed to this because the policemen had already received 2.5% for those 2 relevant years. And the town concluded that if it were to arbitrate for lower amounts, it would in all likelihood lose in the arbitration. However, the union agreed to follow the pattern of the Teamsters Award of 2.25% GWI for the current fiscal year and 1.5% for the coming fiscal year of 2018-19. Thus, affirmatively approving the nurses' contract at our March RTM seems to have been helpful in giving weight to the town's argument that if the firefighters would have likely lost an arbitration if they had tried to buck the developing trend of the Teamsters arbitration award. As it is, the MIRA GWI average for firefighters in the region for 17-18 is 2.23%, and for the following year, it is 2.281%. So both GWIs for the last 2 years of the contract are slightly below the average for this current year and significantly below the MIRA average for the next fiscal year. Looking at comparable wages of firefighters in the region, the base wage of Greenwich firefighters actually is in the middle third of all towns in our region. However, when various stipends are added for additional training and certification, and most of our firefighters have those certifications, the firefighters then end up in the top third. The Greenwich wage ranking may drop slightly for 17, 18, and beyond because some other towns in the area are still negotiating their wages for firefighters for those years. And if the settlements in those towns are a bit higher, it may be that we will drop slightly in the ranking. Lieutenants, deputy fire marshal, deputy chiefs, who are also part of the collective bargaining unit, are generally in the top third of rankings of towns and cities in this region. The total cost of the contract is about $123 million, as set forth in the explanos, and it results in an average increase in the total cost of contract over the 4 years of about 5.6%. And the average annual increase is about 1.42%. These numbers, in fact, are slightly lower than what were in your explanos because a mistake was found in the calculations, and they've been corrected in the meantime. Now, at our February meeting of the Labor Contracts Committee, the town negotiator reported that he hoped to achieve a contract settlement basically along the lines that I just described. And he asked the LCC members whether they believe that would be an acceptable resolution of the matter in order to foreclose further arbitration. None of the 5 members of the LCC, which include the chairs of both the BOC and the Finance Committee, who are also members of the LCC, had any objections. When the LCC met on 16 March, in other words, the following month, in anticipation of this April RTM, the town negotiator reported that he had indeed been able to achieve an agreement exactly along the lines he had outlined to the LCC in February. However, when the LCC voted on the firefighters' contract, the vote was 3-0-1, with 1 member absent and 1 member abstaining. The abstaining member noted that the abstaining member found the contract negotiation results to be acceptable and indeed even excellent. But the member did not want to put the members imprimatur on the contract for 2 reasons. 1, the GWIs were above the Consumer Price Index for the region published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And 2, the firefighters, by delaying their entry into the state insurance pool, had cost the town in the current fiscal year to lose the benefit of health care premium savings we would have had if the firefighters had joined as of 1 July 2017. These observations provoked a lively discussion within the committee, with other members of the committee noting, 1, that the CPI reference smacks of the prevailing marketplace argument asserted by the town in the Teamsters arbitration, which argument the arbitration panel did not adopt, but rather signaled that the MIRA average was the proper standard. And 2, the fact that the union had indeed delayed its entry into the state insurance pool was a budgetary issue and was not relevant to the question of whether the town had done a reasonably appropriate job in negotiating the contract under consideration, which is in fact the standard of review that nearly all members of the LCC have utilized over the decades. As I've noted before many times, the BOC and the Finance Committee focus on the budget process, but the LCC focuses on the contract negotiation process and the quality of the contract negotiations by the town or the Board of Education. That is, in a sense, a reason why this is called the Labor Contracts Committee and not the Labor Budget Committee. During the discussion, it became clear that the desire to consider the contract unofficially acceptable but to abstain was related to the question of whether the abstaining member wanting to urge another committee of the RTM to move to postpone consideration of the contract indefinitely, rather than voting to affirmatively approve the contract. Postponing indefinitely would, of course, allow the contract to enter into force by passage of time. However, no motion to postpone was made in our LCC meeting, and as it is, one other member of the LCC and I are frankly indifferent to the issue of whether we approve affirmatively or postpone indefinitely, as long as the contract enters into force. After all, voting to postpone indefinitely is to vote to have the contract enter into force, and we're not sure that anybody outside this RTM sees any meaningful distinction between the two methods of approval. But another member of the committee feels very strongly that the RTM, if it believes that the contract is acceptable and that the town or the BOE has done an acceptable job of negotiating it, should in fact vote affirmatively. As it is, this member noted that there still are 2017 contracts out there that have not yet been approved, and we still want to assert that the Teamsters arbitration is in fact the guiding trend. This is the same argument that was used, of course, for the affirmative vote for the nurses contract. In any event, the Contracts Committee voted 3-0-1 to recommend that the RTM approve this contract with Local 1042 in one form or another, and I suppose that one could view the abstention as half a yes for the reasons that I've outlined above. And that, Mr. Moderator, should be the last report of the 2016-17 Labor Contracts Committee to this RTM.
Thank you. Rob Pirelli-Minetti with the report of our Finance Committee.
The Finance Committee took up the Teamsters contract on April 2nd. Al Cava presented this. I will not go over the issues raised by Mr. Detchen. He gave a very complete report, and he mentioned most of the issues very clearly, and I want to thank David for doing that and thank him for his work in the 16-17 Labor Contracts Committee. In the Finance Committee, we took it, as Mr. Detchen points out, we take a slightly different approach. We look at the overall budgetary impact of these contracts and the way that the RTM should deal with them as part of the overall budget process. In our discussion, in addition to actually covering most of the points that Mr. Detchen brought up, we also discussed philosophically the question of whether, the benefits were on rather high compared to other towns, and we also had a fairly extensive discussion about whether we should ever vote to approve a labor contract unless there were absolutely nothing in it that we weren't happy with. The Finance Committee has taken the view that we shouldn't, as a general matter, and there was a motion duly made, seconded, and passed 12-0-0 to postpone the item indefinitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Newman with the Town Services Committee report.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Town Services met with Al Cava, Fire Chief Szynski on April 3rd. We discussed the firefighter contract before us. We've been watching this, as Mr. Detchen mentioned, go along for almost 3 years now. We were the ones who noticed there was an error in the cost of labor settlement, which was included in your call notes. Down in the retirement section, the defined benefit Tier 1 and Tier 2, which is supposed to be between 15 and 18% of the total pay of the firefighters, it was almost equal to the $8 million that they get each year. So when Mr. Cava left the room, came back, and it really is down to about $1.7 million a year. The revised revised sheet is on our, is on the town website. After our question and answer, we knew that, we knew that Mr. Detchen would do a very thorough job explaining it, so I decided to keep this abbreviated. After our Q&A, Town Services was comfortable with the cost of the contract. Some of our members were not pleased that it took 3 years to come to an agreement and thought the union could have joined the state health plan last year and saved the town some money. Alcava informed us that the state health plan was not available at the beginning of the negotiation and could not be officially offered to the union during arbitration, and new proposals were closed at that time. The firefighters, along with all other town employees, were moved to the high deductible health plan in January of 2017. The state plan first became available to the town in May of 2017. That's 4 months later. The union did not feel it had enough time to evaluate the state plan before the July 17th enrollment deadline. Town Services was aware that Finance planned on bringing a motion tonight to postpone indefinitely and not to vote to accept or reject the contract. A motion was made in Town Services to postpone indefinitely also. The vote was 10-0-1 with District 12 absent for the vote and myself abstaining. As a volunteer officer in the fire department, I have always abstained from voting on fire department matters. If I had voted, I would vote to approve the contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucia Jansen, Chair of our Budget Overview Committee.
Good evening. So as is customary for the BOC, we took up the firefighter contract that covers the back years 2015-16 to 2018-19. In fact, the BOC has had on its agenda for some time a core aspect of the new labor contract, which is the health care costs by the firefighters. As the only bargaining unit of 9 on the old Cigna plan versus the new state health care plan. In fact, for the new members of the RTM, at last year's RTM May budget meeting, the RTM overwhelmingly voted 141, 62 no, 2 abstain, to reduce by $1.7 million the fixed cost portion of the operating budget based on town leaders having the full expectation that the firefighters were moving to the state health care plan in fiscal year 2017-18. As we all know by now, the firefighters are not moving to the state health care plan during this period with a town cost of the 1.7. So now to the good news, the Teamster contract. This is the third of our 4 or 5 contracts that we're expecting that reflect the arbitration award from the Teamster contract, of which the BOC was the initiator of that first in 30, 40 years to go to arbitration. This favored the town, limiting wage increase levels for fiscal year 17-18 and 18-19, along with some fringe benefit reforms. Once again, the Teamster Award has saved the town significant hundreds of thousands of sums, not only with the 3 current contracts, but hopefully more contracts still pending, and those going forward, the lifetime payouts. The BOC, which the chairman of the LCC referred to, conducted its own benchmark, and we examined more than the base wages. We looked at the 3 anchor factors, wages, healthcare, and retirement. Particular to our benchmark analysis was studying wages and associated stipends, certifications, night duty, and holiday pay. And in our analysis, the firefighters were initially presented as number 7 in pay. But when you factor in these stipends and night differential and other areas, they become the number 1 pay. So we were number 7 and went to 1, where 90%, if not all of the firefighters qualify for these stipends and what have you. We also analyzed and had some concern with the new language in the labor contract around the three-man operation on the trucks. The BOC has received in written form from both the fire chief and the labor negotiator some comfort that overtime costs nor headcount is expected to increase as a result of the new language. The BOC did not see any further upside in pursuing further legal action by continuing to arbitrate the contract. However, we have the expectation that in the next subsequent contract starting in 2020, we will see reform in some of the cost areas the BOC identified in our paper. With not having total satisfaction with the contract, including the items described above, the committee, we were the first committee prior to the Finance and Town Services to make a motion to postpone indefinitely the contract. Thus, the BOC vote was 9-1. The contract, District 6 and District 11 voted against, and District 12 abstained. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's going to make the motion to postpone? Mr. Pirelli-Minetti on behalf of our Finance Committee.
The Finance Committee moves to postpone the Teamsters contract indefinitely.
All right, that being offered on behalf of a committee
Firefighters contract.
does not require a second. So the motion to postpone item 7 indefinitely, which is a motion to kill the item so that we don't take up a vote on the merits, is now before us. Discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. All right, will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item number 7, Finance Committee motion to postpone indefinitely, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the result of the vote on the combined items. Those were items 1 through 5, 15, and 16. Those in favor, 193, opposed 2, abstaining 0. The combined items have carried. All right, we will continue. If there is any need to come back, if item 7 is not postponed indefinitely, we will come back after we dispose of whatever is then before us. Item 8 now comes before us. This is a nomination from our Appointments Committee, and it will be presented by the Chair of the Appointments Committee, John Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee be appointed as regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee for a term expiring December 31st, 2019. Carl Rob Pirelli-Minetti.
Thank you. That being offered on behalf of the Appointments Committee, it does not require a second. Mr. Pirelli-Minetti, are you going to give the report on Mr.
Yes.
Pirelli-Minetti?
Yes, actually, I wanted to use the occasion of my nomination to explain a little bit about the Finance Committee's procedure in dealing with all of these nominations. In this particular group of nominations, I think there were 13 candidates who applied to the Appointments Committee for nomination to the Labor Contracts Committee as regular delegates or alternates. Of those, 6 were either serving delegates or alternates to the Finance Committee. That included myself, Joshua Brown, Bob Byrne, Mike Basham, Adam Rothman, and Brooks Harris. So our procedure in dealing with this, we were concerned. There was a motion made within the committee that all of the candidates for nomination to the Labor Contracts Committee who were either voting members of Finance or were alternates who would vote in the absence of the principal delegate who had been a candidate would recuse themselves from voting. So we had voting delegates or alternates from all districts except District 10. So we only have 11 things. So for my nomination, the vote was 11-0-0 with District 10 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item number 8. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 8, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 9 now comes before us. Mr. Eddy.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee be appointed as a regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee for a term expiring December 31st, 2019. David Detchen.
Mr. Preliminetti, is there going to be any further report?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. The Finance Committee heard a presentation from Mr. Detchen, and the vote was taken, was passed 10-1-0 with District 10 absent again. District 5 voted no based on comments that the delegate believed Mr. Detchen had made in his report to the RTM in January, in which he allegedly stated there was no relationship between contracts and the budget. Thank you.
Discussion on item 9.
Question?
Will the district chairs, and I ask that the district chairs put the name of the individual, not just the item number. Please mark your voting cards, item number 9, David Detchen, and proceed to poll your delegation. Can we continue? Can we handle this multiple voting cards? No? All right. All right, so I will, oh, you know what would be a good thing? All right. You may have seen me leafing through this little pamphlet here. Has color photos and maps and whatnot. And here to talk about it is your moderator pro tem, who did yeoman's work in pulling this pamphlet together, Alexis Vulgaris.
This is like air
You
filler.
can continue to vote as we're listening.
Air
to
filler time while you're voting. So the directory is finished. We are waiting for financial approval from the town clerk's office, and maybe the first selectman can expedite that along. But it's all set, and we had hoped to have it out
If we need any help, we have the tax collector here to
and the tax,
go around.
anybody to help. But
Howard Richmond, welcome. Long time no see in this body. Howard Richmond, a former RTM member.
there you go.
I'm
So
just-
hopefully in May.
I do see Mr. Richmond has a list of names in front of him, so I'm not sure why he's here. All right, I'm sorry. Did you finish, Ms. Vulgaris? Okay. All right, so let's allow some time for these. We currently have 3 voting cards circulating, and I don't want to cause any confusion. So I ask that our districts please expedite that voting so we can continue, but for now, we will be in recess. Well, no, we're not in recess, we're voting, so if you would like to stand and stretch, you could do that.
How you doing? Get away from the mic. Let me grab that. Yeah, I know. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Because I need it, or you're just being generous? Thank you. You never know. Thank you.
No. I'm really commiserating being up here.
Yeah.
It's being the hard one.
I'm sorry?
So the next one being the hard one.
Lucia?
No. Oh, no. Oh, Lucy.
Lucia's next,
Right.
and then,
Yeah,
and then Maria.
right after that.
Yeah. Step away from the microphone.
We have the result of the vote on the motion to postpone item 7, which is the fire contract indefinitely. Those in favor, 148, opposed 47, abstaining 3. That motion to postpone indefinitely is carried. All right, I believe of the other 2 pending votes, we're waiting on voting cards from District 4. So I think at this point we can continue. Item number 10 now comes before us. Mr. Eddy.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee be appointed as a regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee for a term expiring December 31st, 2019, Lucia Jansen.
All right, that is currently before us, being offered on behalf of one of our committees. Rob Pirelli-Minetti with the Finance Committee report.
The Finance Committee interviewed Ms. Jansen, and she was approved 1100.
Discussion on item 10. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item number 10, Lucia Jansen, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 11 now comes before us. Mr. Eddy.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee of the RTM be appointed as regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee for a term expiring December 31st, 2019, Marita Hamra.
Thank you once again. That motion is currently before us. Mr. Pirelli-Minetti.
Yes, the Finance Committee interviewed Mrs. Hammer, and after a brief presentation by the nominee, a number of members or alternates of the committee asked questions. I would point out that none of the questions were asked by people who had been candidates for the Labor Contracts Committee. I explained the procedure earlier that everyone who had been a candidate excused themselves from the discussion and did not vote. There were a number of questions, and the vote was 2 in favor, 9 opposed, no abstentions, with District 10 absent. Districts 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12 voted no. The members who voted no expressed a number of concerns. They talked about lack of experience on the RTM, and in local government, lack of quantitative analysis, budgeting, and labor contract skills. I want to correct one misapprehension that may be out there. I saw an email that circulated that someone said that the Finance Committee said that Marita was not qualified or unqualified. That is not true. What the Finance Committee said and what the concerns were primarily directed at was a lack of experience and a sense that perhaps you should go through an entire budget cycle at least before becoming a voting member of a committee like Labor Contracts.
Thank you. Discussion on item 11. Marita Hamre.
So I understand there was some concern about my lack of time on the RTM and my lack of experience, so I did want to address those concerns here. And I did understand from before the time when I put my application in of those concerns. So I did spend time for several months trying to educate myself, and I did that first by going directly to Al Cava, our town's lead negotiator. I was mistaken. I did think that he was an attorney. He certainly passes himself off well because he's very well qualified. He's not an attorney, but he is our town's lead negotiator. I talked to him about how the process worked. I also attended both of the Labor Contracts Committee meetings this spring to understand how they looked at the issues, how they deliberated, and how they went through the process. And I also read all of the briefs that were filed by the parties in the Teamsters arbitration and read the decision by the arbitrator to understand what is involved and really what is the town's leverage in the negotiations. Aside from wanting to attract high-quality employees, what is our actual leverage? And what I learned a number of things, but unlike in states like West Virginia and Oklahoma, which have just experienced lengthy teacher strikes, municipal employees here are not allowed to strike. So that is not part of the leverage negotiation, unlike in other states where they always have an eye to who will suffer most if there's a work stoppage. We don't have that in Connecticut, and instead the parties' rights are governed by statute and by binding arbitration. Now, in arbitration, there are specific factors that must be considered by the arbitrators, and what they finally determine is they come down to the party's last best offer. So they take the union's last best offer on each item and the town's last best offer, and they cannot split the baby on there. They have to choose one or the other. So if we do not understand what is within the realm of reason in arbitration, we will lose. The arbitrator will choose the union's last best offer, which undoubtedly will be higher than ours, and we will lose. So what is critical in the negotiating process is to understand where the arbitration is likely to come out, what the factors are that the arbitrator will determine, and what what other towns have negotiated and how they will determine that. The reason I think my background lends itself to that is because as a corporate bankruptcy attorney, I worked on corporate reorganizations. There also, the parties' rights are determined not just by the market, but by statute. And if you don't understand and appreciate those rights and how they're determined by statutes, you will not negotiate effectively. So I believe that my years as a bankruptcy attorney, both an associate and a partner doing corporate reorganizations, which included a critical factor in those negotiations is company valuations. You need to understand what the company is worth as a going concern and what is the company is worth in a liquidation value, because it's between those two values that the negotiation occurs. So that's what I did. It did include numbers. It includes looking at relevant data, but it most critically is looking at what is relevant data, and that is determined by what your rights are under the statute. So that is why I thought that I could do a good job as a regular member of the Contracts Committee, of the Labor Contracts Committee. I think that's why the Appointments Committee determined on the first round of voting to put me as a regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee, and I hope you consider the merits of this going forward. Thank you.
All right. I need to do a couple things first before we continue with this item. I have the results of the vote on items 8 and 9. The vote on item 8, which was the appointment of Rob Pirelli-Minetti to be a member of Labor Contracts. Those in favor, 186, opposed 6, abstaining 5. That item is carried. Item 9, the appointment of David Detchen to Labor Contracts. Those in favor, 177, opposed 15, abstaining 5. That item has carried. Now, I realize that I had neglected to call upon Betsy Fruman, Chair of District 9. Your district has a motion directed to this. Betsy Fruman.
District 9 moves to postpone indefinitely items 11, 13, and 14.
All right, we're only going to take up item 11 because that is the only one before us at this time. I'll call upon you later when those subsequent items come before us.
Okay, so you want the district's explanation for
You-
why 11, they want
Sure,
to
go
postpone?
Yep.
District 9 is greatly concerned by the discrepancy between the votes of the only two committees that interviewed Marita Hamray. And then we are including in our motion, but which we'll make later, the two alternate spots to allow appointments flexibility.
All right. That motion to postpone indefinitely, as we now know, is a motion to kill the item. If you are in favor of, if you want to take up a vote on the merits of Marita Hamray's nomination, you should vote no to this motion to postpone indefinitely. If you want to kill this for tonight's meeting, you should vote yes on the motion to postpone. Now, the motion to postpone is debatable, and because of its nature, debate may go into the merits of the item. So I will now call for discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely, which can include discussion of the merits of the candidate. All right. Excuse me. Mr. Eddy. Yeah. All right, hang on a minute. Mr. Klintberg, you have a point of information?
When you say to kill the item, can you explain that a little bit more? Is that a no vote or?
It just means the item will be disposed without having been approved tonight. It essentially, for all practical purposes, flips yes and no's. And so if you are in favor of the candidate, you would want to vote no on this motion. If you are against appointing the candidate tonight, you would vote yes on this. It would kill it if there was a majority vote in favor of this motion to postpone indefinitely, and we do not otherwise fill all the positions on labor contracts. The candidate's name could come back to us by one of a variety of ways at a later meeting. It would have to be June at the earliest, because our May meeting is reserved for the budget. But if there remain openings on labor contracts, the candidate would, could come back, as could another candidate. The Appointments Committee could bring it back, or, there are other provisions in our rules. All right. Mr. Eddy?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to ask the chair of District 9 what the district was hoping to accomplish by this. What the outcome of this would be, just to have a better understanding of its purpose.
Ms. Fruman, are you able to answer that question?
I'll answer it first from the district's point of view. The district felt that they were unable to come to a conclusion when one committee felt so strongly that this was not the right candidate, and the other committee proposed her. On a personal level, can I do that on a personal level? This is not what the committee, on a personal level, for I don't know how many years, I've been talking about the fact that one of the main jobs of this committee is to bring back the information to the district. I have always been upset that District 10 had 3 members on this committee. I would love to see a resolution where you can only have 1 member from each district. So that's personal. That was not what the district
Or how about just a mechanism to dispense information? This is a special committee.
It is a special committee, but you always get better results when we don't have to go to. I think David has done a fabulous job in creating opportunities for us to become better informed, but it would be even better if the 5 members were from 5 different districts and the other 2 members were from 2 other districts. So at least 7 districts would have real firsthand understanding of what was going on.
All right, further discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Stephen Meskers, District 6.
I would ask us to bring this motion to a vote tonight and not to postpone. I think the qualities and characteristics and the experience of the candidate speak for themselves. We're dealing with a person who's a graduate of Harvard University, undergraduate, Berkeley for law, and Union Theological Seminary, not cemetery, sorry. We've got 18 years of involvement in Greenwich. We've got someone new to the RTM, but you know, I've been on the RTM for about 14 years. I wouldn't do labor contracts. I know where I'd be over my head and where I could add value. I think the experience that she brings from a personal basis and the experience we have on the board would give us a more diverse and a better rounded view on our negotiating strategies. I don't want to see any one committee run labor contracts. I want to make sure that we're well represented. And I don't think that that's a diversity of districts, because I know as I sit in our district in 6, we've sat there and said, how many lawyers do we have to be able to deal with the various committees that we have assigned people to? And it gets thin somewhere in some of the districts. So I'm not arguing for or against diversity on where they're from. I think the quality of the candidates and the fact that this candidate wants to come before us, I think she deserves the respect of an up or down vote. Thank you.
Our next speaker, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Salib, and I'm from District 11. First of all, I want to congratulate all of the new RTM members, especially the women. I have met many of you, and I'm very impressed with your abilities and your backgrounds and commitment to our town. In my opinion, the Labor Contracts Committee should be made up of RTM members who have a strong knowledge of how the RTM works and have had multiple years of experience in town. The Labor Contracts Committee is a very small committee, 5 voting members and 2 alternates. The current members on the committee have served a minimum of 8 years on the RTM. The domination of the unions in Connecticut is well documented. Connecticut's Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth, a bipartisan group put together by Malloy, came back and highlighted that labor reform is the top priority in Connecticut. We need labor reform in Greenwich too. We want to pay top dollar for the best people and not 1 penny more. We need an LCC that beats the drum on this day in and day out. Top dollar, but not 1 penny more. I believe we need to find a stronger candidate than Moretta. Someone with proven experience in understanding the ins and outs of labor contracts, and someone not from District 10. I admire Moretta for her life's accomplishments and energy to serve on the RTM. Like Moretta, I am brand new to the RTM. She and I both are learning the ropes. There is certainly more than enough work that can be done. But for the LCC, I believe it would be wise and prudent to find a stronger candidate, more experienced with the RTM and more experienced with labor contracts. Thank you.
Mr. Tuthill. You asked to be recognized. No, that's the wrong motion. Is there a second? Mr. Tuthill has moved to limit debate to 3 minutes per speaker. Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded to limit debate to 3 minutes per speaker on this item. All those that motion to limit debate is not debatable and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of limiting debate to 3 minutes per speaker, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Mr. Detchen, speaking on the motion to postpone indefinitely.
Yes, I'm not sure I have a dog in this hunt. This is my last term on the RTM, so there will be one fewer District 10 member here in the near future. I rise in opposition to this motion because I think there are two significant misconceptions behind this motion. I personally will judge these candidates on, do they bring a skill set helpful to the LCC? Do they understand the dynamics of contract negotiations and the impact of MIRA on labor contracts? And does each candidate show a level of engagement and interest that suggests that the candidate will make a ongoing and productive contribution to the committee? One of the misconceptions, if a candidate's going to have the right skill set, you need to know what the mission of the LCC is. And from what I've been hearing, I'm concerned that there's some confusion still on the purpose of the LCC. The LCC focuses on contract negotiations. It doesn't ignore the budget. It wants the town and the BOE to negotiate contracts that, in fact, have as little budgetary impact as possible. But it's the BOC and the Finance Committee that focus on budgets. It's, in fact, the Labor Contracts Committee that decides whether there's been a good quality negotiation done by the town. As a result, the Appointments Committee, and the Appointments Committee understands this, they've appointed members who have those kinds of skill sets for labor contract negotiations over the year. The Appointments Committee has nominated lawyers who understand the dynamics. They've nominated HR managers from corporations who have experience negotiating contracts in private industry. They've nominated people who have experience in structuring and negotiating union health plans. And they've nominated people who have experience in structuring and valuing the retirement benefit plans. You get the drift. The AC has appointed people who are helpful in vetting contracts. That's the skill set we need. Remember, there was an attempt to convince the Teamsters arbitration panel to view contract negotiations within the LCC as part of the budgetary process. That panel rejected that attempt.
30 seconds.
Another misconception I see is the idea that there needs to be experience to be on this committee, experience in the RTM. The fact is, we're looking at labor contract negotiation vetting. That is, in fact, a skill set that in all likelihood has been generated and developed in the individual's professional career, not in terms of being on the member of the LCC, but rather what they've done in their lives as a lawyer, as a personnel manager, as a health benefits person. There's also a mathematical imperative that's involved here. The fact is, of the 5 regular members that this RTM appointed 2 years ago, 3 are gone, and one of the 2 alternates are gone. There's 3 of 7 members of the original Labor Contracts Committee from last term that are still around, 2 regulars and 1 alternate. The odds are good that, frankly, you're going to have to appoint new members in order to have a full board. I hope everybody gets a fair shake here.
Ms. Swamley, District 10.
Good evening. I've known Marita Hamry for a long time. Our children played Little League together, and later she became the minister of my church. Marita has been active in this community as the coach of 2 different teams, PTA co-president and executive board member, and is on the board of the Greenwich Alliance for Education. The RTM is lucky to have her. I don't like to focus on resumes because I think our founders' focus was on electing people who represented the community. They didn't erect resume tests. However, if one were to have a resume test, Marita reaches the gold standard. Harvard undergraduate, Berkeley Law, one of the top law schools in the country, followed by employment at a top reorganization firm where she became a partner. She is particularly suited for the LCC committee because she is knowledgeable and experienced in contract law. She's also experienced in finance because you can't be a reorganization lawyer without being experienced in finance. She is experienced in negotiations, communications, and other areas that will serve her well. There are presently 2 lawyers on the LCC and one will be retiring. We need another lawyer and a good one. Marita has been attending LCC meetings since the term started. She's engaged. In short, there is a reason the appointments committee selected her for a committee position. They recognized what I've seen through knowing her. She's an incredible asset. There is no need for RTM experience for this committee. As David just explained, there are other members with that experience. She's too valuable to lose. Now to Maria's temperament, which I think is one of her shining characteristics. In addition to being incredibly smart, well-rounded, and a really quick study, she's one of the most even-keeled and thoughtful people that I've ever known. She thinks through all angles and communicates diplomatically and respectfully. Her integrity is inspiring. She is beyond qualified, and most importantly, she would bring a temperament and a presence that would benefit the committee and the entire RTM. It is due to her temperament and communication skills in particular that I urge you to vote for Marita. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joan Talkor. I'm from District 5, and I'm an alternate to the Appointments Committee. I had the opportunity to read all the applications and resumes of the candidates for the Labor Contracts Committee, to participate in their interview, and to vote. As you know, Marita was voted on to the Labor Contracts Committee in the first round with a majority of votes. Why was this? I can't speak for my colleagues on the Appointments Committee, only for myself, and these are my reasons. Marita is the consummate volunteer. In fact, I first came to know her when she coached her son's winning GBA basketball team against my son's team, which didn't fare as well. I was impressed by this since I didn't meet very many mom basketball coaches, and nor one so successful. I currently serve with Marita on the board of the Greenwich Alliance for Education, which initiates, funds, and supports numerous educational initiatives for Greenwich students and schools. And there are plenty more examples. In fact, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone in this town who has not heard of Marita, worked with her, or been otherwise touched by her volunteerism. Marita is sharp as a tack. I won't go into her resume again. Enough people have already commented on that. But from our interview, it was clear that she grasps the important legal issues quickly. And the fact that she has a legal background is critical, especially since Mr. Dutchin, the chair of the Labor Contracts Committee, plans to step down after this term, and there is currently only one other lawyer on the committee. Marita does her homework. She's met with David Dutchin on numerous occasions, had conversations with him about the role of the committee to make sure she understands it. She's attended the labor contracts meetings. She's studied the relevant governing law, and she's taken the time to learn how municipal labor contract negotiations and arbitration work. But probably most importantly, Marita possesses a clear ability to take complicated legal concepts, distill them, and articulate them back to lay people, like most of us, in terms we can all understand. I really appreciate that because that is precisely what this committee is tasked with doing. One other final point. This committee, like all organizations, benefits most and is most effective when it is composed of people from a variety of perspectives and backgrounds and from a variety of committees. I strongly believe in this philosophy. She will think for herself and bring her unique perspective, skill set, and experiences to the role. Of the 4 other members on the committee, 2 are from Finance, 1 is from BOC, and 1 from Parks and Rec. Marita is an alternate on Education and BOC.
30 seconds.
Her nomination provides a healthy balance on the committee. Without a doubt, Marita is highly qualified, has the necessary skills and work experience, and provides much needed balance on the LCC. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Quigley, District 1. I have the vote on item 10, Lucia Jansen to the LCC. Those in favor, 164. Opposed, 23. Abstaining, 9. That item is carried. Mr. Quigley.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of the RTM, First Selectman Tessie, thanks for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm on the Finance Committee, and I've lived in Greenwich for 40 years. And when I joined the RTM a little over a year ago, I kind of thought I knew how the system worked, and I was totally wrong. There was a huge learning curve. The RTM is a unique democratic experiment, and I was surprised how little I knew of our town's government processes when I first joined the RTM. Although significant town government experience is not a prerequisite for every single town committee, the Labor Contracts Committee is unique in that for its size, which is very small, it has outsized responsibilities. This is not a question of competence or experience in a general sense. Marita has that. But it is a question of RTM and town government experience. Every other candidate on the Labor Contracts Committee, whether an alternate or a member, has either served currently in the LCC as a member or alternate, has significant committee experience on either the Finance Committee or the Budget Committee. Every other candidate who was up for a position on the Labor Contracts Committee has a minimum of 8 years experience in the RTM. That goes a long way to understanding the processes of the town, how the town works. And labor contracts are very, very unique. They're filled with minutia. This is not something you just have a grasp of when you get on a committee. It was the Finance Committee's opinion, as expressed in its 2-9 vote against Marita's nomination, that RTM experience is vitally important to this committee specifically. As a member of District 1, I, like many of you, have had this debate within my own district when it comes to district representatives to committees. This is just on a district level. Someone with no experience who's new to the RTM may come on and say, gee, I'm interested in land use, or I'm interested in finance. But you may have someone else who's been around a little longer who has the same interest. And usually there's sort of a tacit understanding that maybe that person who has a little bit more gravitas should be the representative, and the person who's new should take a position as an alternate. Marita is, like the rest of us, someone who cares passionately about Greenwich. I have no doubt about that. I know she's a great mom, I know she's a good person, and I know she has an extensive resume that includes going to some great universities.
30 seconds.
But I asked my fellow RTM members tonight to consider the fact that on this specific committee, RTM and local government experience is extremely important. That's all this is about. That's all it was about in the Finance Committee, and I think that's all it should be about tonight, and I think Marita deserves a vote tonight, and I urge you to vote against her nomination.
Thank you. Lucy Krasner, District 5.
I'm actually delighted to be speaking after the speaker who just spoke before me, because I have a completely different view on the RTM and the Labor Contracts Committee. I've been on the RTM 40 years, and I've seen people be chosen for the Labor Contracts Committee, and I've also seen how the Appointments Committee works. I was on that for, 30-something years. I think that we should definitely not consider the importance of RTM membership for the Labor Contracts Committee. This is a totally unique committee. I don't think you need to sit through all of our meetings and see how we work on parks and rec areas and everything else in town to be an absolutely outstanding member of the Labor Contracts Committee. I understand that I believe that Mr. Detchen spoke beautifully about the needs for what he's looking for on the Labor Contracts Committee. Joanna spoke about her qualifications and what she's done in her bankruptcy negotiations in the law firms that she had worked in. And I don't think we need to stack the Labor Contracts Committee with people from the Finance and the Budget Committee. I think that I heard that they were asking questions that were really not related to capacity to serve on the Labor Contracts Committee. I do not think that RTM experience is necessary for this. Her other experience is outstanding. I would urge you to vote no in postponing this so we can take up her candidacy and her completely suitable record tonight.
Peg Freiberg, District 7. I'd ask our interested speakers to come take the seats up front so we can just have one follow another.
This may come as a surprise since I'm a lawyer myself, but I would like to argue that being a lawyer is not important for the Labor Contracts Committee. Don't be deluded by the presence of the word contracts in the committee. The town has an excellent law firm that it sends out its labor contracts work to, who can do the negotiation of the verbiage, the amending of the verbiage, representation in arbitration and in court. We are covered perfectly on the legal front with our outside law firm. We don't need people on the Labor Contracts Committee for legal work. What we need people on the Labor Contracts Committee for is to carry out the function of the committee as defined in the RTM rules, which is to figure out whether the deals that come to them already negotiated by the town but requiring ratification in effect, whether these are good deals or bad deals. And for figuring out whether a collective bargaining deal is a good deal or bad deal, it's not necessary that you be able to do things that lawyers do in this connection. It's necessary, first of all, that you must have significant management experience, because after all, as a person who's representing the town and not the union, you are on the side of management. So you should have significant management experience to have good perspective for evaluating these deals. In addition, contrary to what some other speakers have said, it is vitally important that you have prior RTM experience. Why? I'll give you an analogy. Suppose a person is sick and needs the care of a doctor. If the person, if you have a choice between a specialist who doesn't know the person and a
30 seconds.
A non-specialist who knows the person, you might feel one way or the other. But if you have somebody who doesn't know the patient and is not a doctor in cardiology or whatever the area is that the patient needs care in, that's sort of the worst of all possible combinations. So ideally, we would have somebody with management experience and RTM experience, at least one of those.
Thank you. John Mastracchio, District 10.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Cornelius, hang on a minute. Mr. Cornelius? No, but the motion to postpone indefinitely permits debate to go into the merits because it kills the item. So people are allowed to go into the merits of the item. Mr. Mastracchio.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow neighbors, it's as your neighbor that I speak to you tonight. I will not diminish your concern about Moretta's longevity on the RTM, but I will address it. And I'll tell you through experience that I'm incredibly impressed by her. This is a trait nobody's brought up, so I won't repeat everybody else's. She asks questions. She asks insightful questions. And more interestingly, she listens to the answers. She doesn't force her opinion on anybody. She's level-headed. And by the way, she volunteered for this job, just like we all did. When your neighbors volunteer to do a thankless job, and I wouldn't be on the Labor Contracts Committee if you paid me, you don't diminish that spirit. You let them do it. She joined our committee, our district rather, I apologize, before this session started. She attended our district meetings. And at one point I said to her, listen, it's going to take you about 6 months of attending RTM meetings before you get a feel for what we do, because sometimes we kind of look a little crazy. But there's a method to our madness, and we proceed thoughtfully with respect to our neighbors. I spoke to her.
Pardon?
I spoke to her after our last district meeting, and I said, I'm really impressed. It's not going to take you 6 months. You've really come up to speed right away. So I urge you to vote for her nomination. Thank you.
Dr. Carl Carlson, District 1.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, I am Carl Carlson of District 1. I've been on the Appointments Committee either as an alternate or as a voting member for 20 years. I came on to the Appointments Committee to shadow Fred Sibley, who was a sick man at the time, and that during Fred's last years, I did have the voting members work. This is the way an important committee, a newer member, follows into the work of a senior member. In my career in the Appointments Committee, I had been very, very friendly to my very old friend, Joan Caldwell, who I had known since 1964. And I very often did little more than bullet vote for Joan Caldwell on the first ballot to try to preserve her as a foundation member. The usual situation in the last years is that my vote was for two ladies, Joan Caldwell and Lucia Jansen, on the first ballot, because those two I wanted to get in. So I'm lady friendly. In this vote on Moretta Hamray, I did not vote for Moretta Hamray at all in the Appointments Committee this year. I thought, in view of her lack of experience in RTM, that if she was going to go into the Labor Contracts Committee, she should go into the Labor Contracts Committee as an alternate for at least the first term. In the case of the selection of Lucia Jansen, who I was very enthusiastic about when she first appeared before the Appointments Committee, I had to labor hard to get the Appointments Committee to choose her as an alternate. I think the right way for a serious person to enter the Labor Contracts Committee is to serve as an alternate for a couple of years. I think
30 seconds.
I think there's something of a mistake here in nominating Moretta Hamray for a voting member and Robert Burns as an alternate. And I think perhaps if one is still favoring District 10 people, that these should be switched. So I think this is a mistake, and I ask you tonight not to vote for putting Moretta Hamray on the Labor Contracts Committee. Thank you.
Kimberly Fiorello, District 7.
Thank you. Kimberly Fiorello. When I think about the Labor Contracts Committee, it brings to mind the idea that it's a troubling thing to have the public sector unionized against the taxpayers. And we are definitely at a point where we need structural reform in our cost structure. And part of that is really dealing with the salaries, the benefits, the whole package that we pay for everyone who works in our town. And when I think about Moretta's candidacy, one thing that is a little bit troubling for myself is what I see as potential sympathies for the largest employee bloc that we have to negotiate with. So when we had the unions come with very strong, talented help, experienced help, loads of data to argue for their case and why they should be paid and earn all of the benefits that they want and why they deserve that. And we have a negotiator who goes to those meetings, but we also need people who will be speaking for the taxpayer and arguing for our case and coming with our own set of data to say why this amount is fair, why this amount is the top in our community among our peer groups, and isn't that enough? And also to be able to say, are we getting the best people for the top dollar that we pay? And when we consider someone for the LCC, I understand she's very talented, but we also have many other talented candidates, people who have great experience that is relevant to management. We have a managing director of Swiss Re and Kidder Peabody who graduated summa cum laude from Columbia. There are many talented people in our community for us to consider. So for myself, I would urge my fellow RTM members to vote against Moretta, but also find a stronger candidate who can speak for the taxpayers. And I applaud all of her talents and accomplishments, and I don't mean to diminish any of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Miriam Cruiser, District 7. No? I'm sorry. Next.
Hello, good evening. Hi, my name is Lisa Seglum. I'm a first-time member of the RTM representing District 8 and the alternate on the Finance Committee who voted on item 11. Over the past few months, I've learned the extreme importance of the LCC, that it's their duty to examine and analyze each proposed labor contract that has been proposed by arbitration or tentatively approved by the town or our Board of Education. These labor contracts account for approximately 6% of the town's operating costs and approximately 80% of the costs of the BOE. It is therefore important that we have experience not only in labor and labor contracts, but that we have the quantitative analysis skills to really analyze the true costs of the labor contracts. And that we also have the experience of people who really are very knowledgeable in employee benefit plans, as well as the RTM experience. I think it's very important as well to really understand the organizational structure and the operating of the town. I voted against the nomination of Ms. Hamre not due to her general qualifications, but as a result of her lack of experience as it specifically relates to the skills that are necessary to successfully serve on the LCC. The labor unions are sending their most experienced negotiators to our town, and we therefore have a duty to our constituents to send the most qualified and experienced members to the LCC due to the material financial impact that these labor contracts have on our operating, on the operating costs of our town. And I urge everyone to, vote tonight and vote against Ms. Hamre. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Cooper. I'm from District 5, and I'm an alternate to the Finance Committee. And the reason I'm talking tonight, I would like to remind everyone that the appointments were nominated by the Appointment Committee, but the vote was the Finance Committee. And I want you all to think about why the Finance Committee was chosen as the group that actually vets the candidate. I should point out that I have been a public company CFO for over 10 years. I'm on a number of boards, and actually I'm one of those Harvard people. So I think you really need to think about why is the Finance Committee vetting these candidates? And it's because the labor contract controls most of the 80% of our budget's cost. So you want to have people, it's not an indication of character, it's you want people who've had experience in negotiating labor contracts, and that experience comes in two ways, either the experience through years in the RTM, seeing other people, how they've negotiated the contract, or have had prior experience. It makes a huge difference. I think we hear the discussion tonight of having through the Teamsters contract and then the nurses contract, you start seeing demonstrable change in the outcome of these contracts. So I would encourage you, I voted against Marita for this specific committee, but I think her character is outstanding, and she's a wonderful add to the RTM, and maybe she could start as an alternate on this committee. Thank you.
Our next speaker.
Hi, I'm Jenny Baird from District 5. I was not planning to speak this evening, but I am compelled. I'd like to thank Kimberly Fiorello, who called a spade, and I think she pointed out what this is really about, is a fear that Marita's sympathies are with the teachers and the unions and not with the town. I think if you believe that, then you will vote against Marita. I know Marita. I think most of us have worked on various projects with Marita through town. She's a very fair-minded, analytical, and thoughtful person, as many people have attested to being a good listener and fair-minded. Another speaker tonight pointed to Marita's lack of general management experience. I just want to point out that as the pastor of her church, she actually does have general management experience managing contracts, labor relations, budgets, and so forth of that organization. Finally, I'm very concerned about this sense I have that the RTM is an insiders club. I would like to say that new people bring fresh perspective, and while I appreciate the sense that the Labor Contracts Committee is specialized, I know from many organizations I've been on that a lot of times people who've been in an organization for a very long time can't see their way out of problems because it's always been one way, or there's so much history that it's hard to look for creative and different solutions. I encourage you not to postpone this item and to vote for Marita.
Louisa Stone, District 10.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Byrne. I want to remind you that the vote we'll take would be to whether to postpone this item. I can't remember a nomination that has brought so many people with so much information and such passion, and if we postpone it, we're just going to have to do it over again.
Well,
so
no,
let's not postpone. Let's
Stone,
vote tonight.
I don't want there to be any confusion. This is a motion to kill it. It's called a motion to postpone
Right.
indefinitely,
Well,
but it's not designed to put it off to another
No,
meeting.
but an affirmative vote
An affirmative vote
postpone.
just
Okay.
kills the nomination.
Right. If residents in town and membership of the RTM were a qualification, you'd want me on labor contracts, but I don't think that's a good idea. We have an extraordinary candidate. I'm blown away that someone who is a graduate of Harvard and Berkeley Law, I'm an Easterner, and Union Theological Seminary would be willing to be on the RTM and on the Labor Contracts Committee. This is what is great about the RTM. Vote not to postpone so that we can vote on Marita Hamre.
Paul Curtis, District 9.
I'm going to move this back. So, good evening. This is a rare thing. I don't speak very often, and I actually don't speak in opposition of my own district. But I want to make two very quick points. The first one is that please understand, ladies and gentlemen in this room, the Labor Contracts Committee does not negotiate labor contracts. Okay? Their job is to do two things, is to advise the labor director, Mr. Cava, on directions that the RTM would like to see, and then to report back to us after that contract has been negotiated for our ratification and vote. They do not negotiate. They are not allowed in the room during that time. The second thing is that as a longtime RTM member, the normal course of going up into a committee like this is to start as an alternate. So while the qualifications of the candidate are exceedingly good, and from other personal connections, there's a very good person here, This is a candidate we don't want to lose. So I'm going against my own district and say, please do not vote to postpone this indefinitely, and let's bring this to the floor and let the RTM as a membership vote yes or no on this candidate. Thank you.
All right, we are going to take a record vote on the pending motion to postpone indefinitely. So will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? This was offered by District 9. District 9, motion to postpone item 11 indefinitely. Now, I will review one more time the impact of your vote. If you want to kill this item at this moment, you should vote yes on the motion to postpone indefinitely. If you want to take this nomination up and decide it on the merits, you should vote no. All right, please proceed to poll your delegation. We will need to await the result of that vote before proceeding further. So again, this will be a time to get up and stretch after you have voted. I ask the district chairs to please expedite the voting. Ms. Vulgaris? We have the result of the vote on the District 9 motion to postpone item 11 indefinitely. In order to carry, it required a majority vote. Those in favor, 72, opposed 121, abstaining 3. Motion to postpone indefinitely has failed. All right. The item 11 is now before us. Betsy Fruman has asked to be recognized.
I would like to, personally, this is not a motion from the district, this is a motion just for me. I would like to make a motion to amend the motion before us so that Marita would be an alternate rather than a delegate. Do you want me to speak to it now?
All right. Well, first of all, is there a second? All right. And I had discussed with our town attorney, Wayne Fox, the possibility of someone making such a motion, and we both agree it is in legal order. We obviously, there are only 2 alternate positions, and we have 2 alternate candidates later on our agenda, so something would have to give if this were to, if the motion were to be adopted and then it were to pass the amended resolution. So currently before us is a motion to amend item 11 to change regular to alternate. Discussion on that motion to amend.
Can I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. There are very few committees that are as important and influential as labor contracts. I think it is a true leadership position on the RTM, and I would hate to lose such a qualified person because they were put in the wrong slot. The right slot for a new person is to be an alternate. Labor contracts, as I understand it, their discussion includes all 7 members. I also understand that the 5 regulars are not always there. So it is not putting her in a position where she doesn't have the ability to vote. Many times Mr. Detchen has told us that all 7 voted in favor of this contract or whatever. I just feel this is a much better way to use such a talented person.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion to amend. Mr. Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow members of the RTM, I think this whole discussion is very, very simple. It's perfectly reasonable to think that someone new to the RTM can bring a fresh perspective. It's perfectly reasonable to think that someone on this committee should have a record of service before they participate. They're 2 opposing sides. They're both entirely reasonable. The additional motions that we've had today to try to work around the normal process, I think, are damaging to us. If we have a simple up and down vote, Ms. Hamra will either be appointed a regular member or not. If she's not appointed a regular member, we will need the Appointments Committee, unless the RTM decides to take another route. The Appointments Committee will take up the work of opening up candidates. I mean, I'm assuming that this will do. I can't speak for the committee, but if we're consistent with what we've done in the past, we will open up candidacy to the entire RTM again. What will probably happen is we will appoint someone who is has been nominated to be an alternate, and then we'll have to find someone else to fill that slot, which would likely be one of the people that we've already said that we thought would be a person of good service. So I think if we let the process move ahead as it normally does, we'll be very, very well served. And by these additional motions, I'm concerned that it's undermining the way that we normally do things in a way that's reasonable and straightforward. So I would urge you not, in this case, to not support this motion, and let's go ahead with a regular vote and take it from there.
Thank you. Please state your point of information, Mr. Gamanos.
As
She has, but I think that's got, well, we got to know that she wants to be.
Well, I think the candidate is here to run as a regular member. And if we, I don't think it's appropriate to ask the candidate at this stage. If we amend it, the candidate could then refuse. But the candidate here is for a regular member. Arlene Lamazzo, District 6.
This motion to change the appointment from delegate to alternate, if we do that, what happens is then you have sort of a snowball effect, or I should say a domino effect, where the next person on the list, Mr. Brown, who has been a member and is a regular member, then you have Mr. Spilo, who is an alternate. Again, you're going to start to rearrange a whole series of appointments, and I think that's a mistake. Let's stick to what's in order, which is to vote it as we have it. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, good evening. Catherine Lababo, District 2. I'm speaking in opposition to change this from a regular appointment to an alternate. Based on, if memory serves, a few years ago, we did actually overstep an alternate for the Planning and Zoning Commission and appoint a new member to that board. So I'm speaking in opposition to this because to say that it isn't done or it's never done, I believe to be simply untrue from the history of this board. Thank you.
Are we ready to vote on this motion? Yes. Mr. Todd Hill. All right, the motion for the previous question has been moved and seconded. That is a motion to cut off debate. It is not itself debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. If you want to immediately proceed to vote on the pending motion to amend, you should vote in favor of this. I will call for a voice vote in the first instance. If you want to continue to listen to speakers addressing the motion to amend, you should vote no. All those in favor of Mr. Tudhill's motion for the previous question, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That motion is carried. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Fruman, motion to amend item 11. And proceed to poll your delegation. Again, we cannot proceed on item 11 until we have the results of this vote. So, in order to save time, I'm going to call for the next item. When we dispose of that, anticipating it is not a matter that will take up time, when we dispose of that, we will come back and pick up item 11 wherever that stands. All right, is there any objection to that? All right. May we have the resolution on item 12? John Eddy, Chair of our Appointments Committee.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee of the RTM be appointed as regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee for a term expiring December 31st, 2019, Joshua Brown.
All right. That is now before us. Mr. Pirelli-Minetti with the Finance Committee report.
The Finance Committee approved the nomination of Joshua Brown, 1100, District 10 absent.
Discussion on item 12. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 12. Proceed to poll your delegation. At this point, we will await the result of the pending votes. 7, 8, and 11, please. All right, we'll have the official vote shortly, but the motion to amend has failed. So item 11 is now before us. Any further discussion on item 11? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item 11, and proceed to poll your delegation. So everybody knows we have not amended this. This is to appoint Marita Hamray to be a regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee. The vote on the Fruman motion to amend, those in favor 31, opposed 164, abstaining 2. The motion failed. We are now voting on the merits of item 11. We have the result of the vote on item 12, which is the appointment of Joshua Brown to labor contracts. Those in favor, 184, opposed 6, abstaining 7. That item has carried. All right, I think we're far enough along we can continue. Let's see, item 13 now comes before us. Mr. Eddy with that resolution.
Okay, we're moving into the alternate members.
Right.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee of the RTM be appointed as alternate member of the Labor Contracts Committee for a term expiring December 31st, 2019. Michael Spillo.
Thank you. That is now before us. Rob Pirelli-Minetti with the Finance Committee report.
The Finance Committee approved Mike Ospilo as an alternate by a vote of 11-0-0, District 10 absent.
Discussion on item 13. Item 14 now comes before us. Mr. Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Appointments Committee be appointed as an alternate member of the Labor Contracts Committee for a term expiring December 31st, 2019, Robert Burns.
Thank you. Mr. Pirelli-Minetti, the Finance Committee report.
The Finance Committee approved the nomination of Robert Burns as an alternate, 11-0-0, District 10 absent.
Discussion on item 14. Mr. Detchen. David Detchen, District 10. Oh, is that true? Did I call for the vote on item 13? All right. Then let me, Mr. Detchen, please. We voted. We have announced the vote on 12. 11 is being tabulated. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item 13, Michael Spilo to Labor Contracts, and proceed to poll your delegation. We are now on item 14, which is Robert Burns to be an alternate of Labor Contracts. Mr. Detchen.
Mr. Moderator, as a point of order, I'd like to request that we have the results on item 11 before we close item 14 for vote.
All right, it's going to pass, but I will do that. All right, we have the result of the vote on item 11, the appointment of Marita Hamray to be a regular member of the Labor Contracts Committee. Those in favor, 128, opposed 62, abstaining 6. That item has carried. All right, I have called for the vote on item 13, Michael Spilo, alternate member. Was there any further discussion on item 14, Robert Burns? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item 14, Robert Burns, and proceed to poll your delegation. All right, that leaves one final item on our agenda, item 17. Mr. Siciliano, thank you for your patience.
Good evening. Item number 17, resolved that the RTM approve a lease between the town of Greenwich and the new Singular Wireless AT&T for property located at the Griffith Harris Golf Course, 1323 King Street. The lease shall be for an initial 10-year period ending February 28th, 2028, with options to renew 3 additional 5-year terms.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 17 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports of the committees that considered this, beginning with Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, our committee took this up 2 weeks ago. We had Mr. Siciliano, Director of Parks and Rec, and Attorney Amina Ahmad of the Law Department to go over the terms of the lease and give us a history behind it. Mr. Siciliano described the lease facility, which is a pole that is near the 8th tee at the Griff Golf Course. The pole's been there since 1983. The town's police department has the top location on the pole for transmission of 911 calls. Verizon has a second lower location, and AT&T, which is the subject of this lease, as new Singular Wireless is the low man on the totem pole. They have the lowest location on the pole. There are no other cell phone providers located on the pole. Ms. Ahmad explained that this lease will replace a lease that AT&T currently has for the pole location. The original lease with AT&T goes back to 2006. This lease that we reviewed is basically the same lease that was there before us, with some updates to conform to the town's current requirements regarding insurance and indemnification clauses. Mr. Siciliano described AT&T as a good tenant to work with. It adheres to police department frequency requirements. The rent in 2006 began at $30,000 per year with an escalator clause. That rent is currently paying $41,000 per year. Under the new lease that you're considering this evening, the rent will be $41,500 with a 2% per annum escalator beginning in the 6th year of the initial 10-year term. Verizon has also entered into contract negotiations with the town. Their lease will be coming up to us in June. Their lease is pretty much structured the same way. The term for both of these leases, AT&T and Verizon, that'll be coming up shortly, will be for 10 years, with the tenants having 3 5-year options to renew. Both leases start at the same amount of rent and the same percentage escalator, but the Verizon lease that comes before us will have an escalator starting in the 2nd year, while the AT&T escalator clause starts in the 6th year. The Verizon rent is slightly higher because the higher position on the pole is more valuable to that company. We made some language changes to the lease, which at the appropriate time I will discuss with you. Most notably, we deleted one entire paragraph because it was repetitive of another paragraph already in the lease, and there were minor word changes that we will discuss. Our vote on the changes was 10-0-0. We followed, after we went through the lease provisions and the changes, we had a long discussion on how the rent had come to be negotiated. Our delegate from District 6 asked if the town had calculated the value of the lease to AT&T. It was Colleen Jenkins from 6 stated that she knew of a lawyer who was experienced in cell tower rentals who provides a service to municipalities that calculates the value of a cell tower location to the cellular provider. The town could utilize such a service in valuing the location on the pole. Ms. Ahmad and Mr. Siciliano explained that in 2015, the town had researched a large number of cell tower sites owned by municipalities in Fairfield County to determine what rent was being paid to those municipalities. The median rent was approximately $2,000 per month, and the rent that is being charged by the town was on the higher end of the pay scale in Fairfield County leases. Ms. Ahmad also explained that a few years ago, the first selectman was approached by a company that professes to be an expert in evaluating the value of transmitter locations and offered to represent the town in dealing with telephone companies, but they were looking for a percentage of the rent as their fee. And the town would also have to use the company's form of lease, and the town rejected that proposal. It was noted that the transmission coverage area is a factor of the height on the pole, and the town's pole is located in a valley. The other concern was expressed that a change in technology could make the pole more valuable or cause it to lose all of its value. This lease does allow that AT&T can terminate the lease upon 3 months' notice, which it could likely do if new technology made their equipment on these poles less valuable to the lessee. In the negotiations of this lease, AT&T had initially offered a rent of $30,000 per year, but the town negotiated the rent up to the $41,500 that is stated in the lease. We took 2 votes on the matter. The vote as to legal order of the lease as revised by our committee was 10-0-0 with districts 3 and 9 absent. We took a vote on the merits, and our vote there was 7 in favor, with 3 districts opposed. Those districts were 1, 6, and 12. The no voters thought that the town should explore more fully the value of the pole site to AT&T before executing this long-term lease.
Thank you. Andy Chapin with the Parks and Recreation Committee report.
Parks and Rec took up this item at the last meeting. I cannot add to Mr. Wells' report. We voted 11-0-0, District 4 absent, in favor of the lease.
Thank you. Peter Berg with the Land Use Committee report.
So the Land Use Committee took this up last Monday, 2 Mondays ago. We also had Amina Ahmad. There was a question about why the lease had a cancellation provision for AT&T with a minimal payment. It was explained that this was the same lease structure as in the current lease. However, several Land Use Committee members felt this was not sufficient reason. A motion was made to eliminate the cancellation provision, but we voted that down 2-9-0. Our vote on the item was 10-1-0. District 2 voted against the lease because of the cancellation provision.
Thank you. And Mr. Wells, all right, why don't we take up your committee amendments?
Okay, so the changes to the lease that we made were on page, there are a total of 7 of them. The first one is on page 4, paragraph E, alterations and improvements. That provision was deleted in its entirety because it is repetitive of paragraph 7, which is entitled Improvements and Alterations. And upon the advice of Attorney Ahmad, we deleted the 3rd paragraph and left the 7th paragraph in place. On page 10 of the lease, in the third line, there is a reference to the lessor in the entirety of the lease. The lessor is referred to as the town, so we made that change. We deleted lessor and inserted in its place the words "the town." On page 12 of the lease, in the second full paragraph of paragraph 9, there is, in the third line, it says, and shall further indemnify and hold harmless. We inserted the word defend after indemnify so that it reads indemnify, defend, and hold harmless. And on page, I guess that's it. On page 20 of the lease, in the paragraph 22, again, there's in the third line of paragraph 22, it says lessee shall indemnify and hold harmless. We inserted the word defend between indemnify and so that it reads indemnify, defend, and hold harmless the town. And finally, in the last sentence, the sentence did read, in the event that the lessee encounters any hazardous substances that do not result from its activities, it shall immediately notify the town. We changed that to read, in the event that the lessee encounters any hazardous substances, whether or not resulting from its activities, it shall immediately notify the town. I recall there was one other one. Yes, at the bottom of page 5, in the paragraph that starts non-interference, at the end of that sentence, we included the language that ends with, to the then existing equipment of lessee. We inserted, as long as lessee operates and continues to operate within lessee's frequencies and in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. Also, in that same paragraph A, non-interference, in the third line, it states mistakenly lessors located on the property. It should be lessees, and we made that change from lessors to lessees.
All right, that is a motion to amend offered on behalf of our Legislative and Rules Committee and does not require a second. Is there any objection to any of those proposed changes? Hearing none, those amendments may be adopted upon unanimous consent. District 6 has took this item up. Candace Garthwaite, Chair of District 6.
Yes, good evening. Colleen Jenkins, our delegate to the Legislative and Rules Committee, brought to our attention that we do look at very carefully at the legal language and the intent, yet we don't look as thoroughly as she would like us to the commercial value of the lease. And therefore, she asked that we put forth a motion, and that motion was to refer this item back to Finance to be brought back at the June RTM meeting based on our belief as a district that the lease needs more detailed commercial research to make sure that we're actually getting the value that we should for the lease.
All right, that is a motion offered on behalf of one of our districts. It does not require a second. So this is a motion to refer item 17 to our Finance Committee to return, and the Finance Committee to bring it back for the June meeting. Discussion, that is now before us. Discussion on that motion to refer. Colleen Jenkins, District 6.
Thank you very much. Actually, this was never referred to the Finance Committee. So our motion is to refer it to Finance Committee. If you realize tonight, we referred a $35,000 gift to the Finance Committee for review. This is actually potentially a $10 million contract, not referred to the Finance Committee. The $10 million comes from $40,000 a year up to 25 years. So that's why we ask you to refer to Finance. The other thing that's really important to be more clear is I found an expert who has negotiated ATT contracts as an employee for ATT for 11 years. I found him in Nashville. And he said something really crucial is to look at this contract in terms of what is the value of this cell phone site to AT&T. When we listened to how valuation was determined, it was, well, we'll do a survey of towns in Fairfield County and figure out what are they paying. Or we can look at other leases the town has, the boat club lease or a lease to a nonprofit nursery school. Well, this is different. This is a major corporation, billion-dollar corporation with a $10 million lease. So I really hope that due diligence is done, and not necessarily only in the Finance Committee, but the Finance Committee can reach out to an expertise in cell phone towers.
Further discussion on the motion to refer. Glenn Canner, District 12.
Good evening. Glenn Canner from District 12. I'm here to share with you that I am a member of Legislative and Rules. I heard what was discussed, and when I brought it back to District 12, they agreed that this should be referred to Finance and hopefully come back before this body in June when we look at the Verizon lease. Essentially what I explained to them was that Ms. Jenkins did share that this is big business, that there are companies out there that see that these cell tower sites have unique value depending on where they're located, their size, et cetera. And there are professional, essentially appraisers that can put a value on it and can go to the company and say, we know this is worth to you a lot more, and we think the lease is worth more. I guess, however you do the math, 41,000 times 25, whether it's $1 million, 10 million, I don't think you would want to buy a commercial piece of property without having it appraised. And so essentially what Ms. Jenkins was saying was that we really should possibly have an appraiser look at the value of this lease, especially since we're going to be doing another one in 2 months. I also heard with interest, Assistant Town Attorney Ahmad mentioned that these people had consulted with the Selectman's office and they had discussed it. I heard that the deal breaker was that we do try now to have consistent leases, but I think this is different. Basically, a lease is very simple. It's rent times terms, and if there are people out there for a fee that could negotiate the company higher, I don't think it would be necessarily the worst thing to give up some of our boilerplate to possibly bring in more revenue for the town. And finally, so I brought those two issues back to D12, and then they added that this matter had only been referred to Legislative and Rules, Parks and Recreation, and Land Use, which aren't really your money committees, and they felt that the prudent thing to do would be to refer this to Finance. Hopefully, within the next 2 months, Finance could look into what Ms. Jenkins is discussing about professional appraisers looking at this lease and the Verizon lease, and then come back in June and decide what we want to do. So District 12 is in support of this motion to refer to Finance.
Thank you. Ms. Jenkins, you wanted to correct something?
Yes, I do. I want to take 1 0 away.
Okay, so 1 million instead of 10?
1 million.
All right. Rob Pirelli-Minetti, Chair of the committee to which the motion would refer this.
I normally don't look for extra work, but as longtime members of the RTM will recall, in the spring of 2012, a subcommittee of the Finance Committee chaired by myself and Jill Oberlander, who's now chair of the BET, provided a report on all of the town's leases. And one of the things that we noted was that all leases should be referred to the Finance Committee, to the RTM, and to the Finance Committee in particular, like this. And I believe that it was not consistent with the policy that the RTM adopted in approving this lease report not to have referred it to Finance. So we think it should come to Finance. Thank you.
Mr. Klintberg, District 6.
Gunnar Klintberg, District 6. I don't know how these cell towers really work, but I would like the Finance Committee, if it's referred to the Finance Committee, to also not only look at the Fairfield County market. The cell tower is very close to New York. And as we know with advertising and other businesses, New York, if it works in New York, the cell tower also, then that could be a whole other bowl of important money for us. That could be worth a lot more than if you compare to a cell tower in Wilton or anywhere else in Fairfield County. Just a point.
Thank you. All right. I will call for a voice vote, this being a procedural matter. If you are in favor of referring this back to finance, you would vote in favor. If you want to take this up on its merits tonight, you should vote no on this motion to refer. All those in favor of referring item 17 to our Finance Committee, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion is carried. All right, that disposes of item 17. I do have the result of the vote on item 13, the appointment of Michael Spilo to be an alternate member of Labor Contracts. Those in favor, 161, opposed 28, abstaining 2. That item has carried. The result of the vote on item 14, Robert Burns as alternate member of Labor Contracts. Those in favor, 182, opposed 0, abstaining 3. That item has carried. Well, that concludes our business for tonight. There being no further business to come before the meeting, this meeting stands adjourned upon unanimous consent. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe trip home. We will see you in May. By the way, the May budget meeting will start at 7 o'clock.